Is family the most important aspect of life? The reason I asked that question is because I was in conversation with someone yesterday, and that was a comment that was made, that they believe that family was the most important thing in life. That's what they said. Family is the most important, were their words. And I began to think on that, and from a natural standpoint, it seems to reason that that would be true. That nothing comes before family from a natural standpoint. But as we look into things outside of the natural, as we should, as professing believers, as born again believers, as Christians, we ought not to think about things solely from a natural perspective. When we look outside of the natural and we peer into the spiritual, what we find is that family is not the most important aspect of life, not the most important thing about life, because we gather that understanding based off of how Jesus thought about family. What was Jesus's thoughts concerning family? Well, Jesus said on one instance, on one occasion, he said, "Who is my mother and who is my brother?" When they were, I believe his mother and his brothers were trying to get his attention. He was inside of a house ministering to people. And they came inside and said, "Your mother and your brothers are, your family's trying to call for you." And he said, "Who is my mother and who is my brother?" And he said, "Except he that does the will of my father, the same is my mother and my brother and my sister." And so Jesus didn't even necessarily consider his own flesh and blood, being Mary, being James, one of his brothers, as the most important. He didn't even identify them as his family necessarily in the truest sense. He said, "Those that do the will of my father, they are my mother, and they are my brothers, and they are my sisters." And this is the same mentality that we're to have. This is the same understanding that we're to have as Christians. In another occasion, Jesus teaches concerning family. He says, "If you don't love me more than you love your mother, or more than you love your father, more than you love your husband or your wife," he says that you're not worthy of me. You're not fit to follow me if you don't love me more than these other relationships in your life. And I remember talking with an atheist about this, and he said, "There's no way that I could devote or love a God more than I love my own flesh and blood, my family." And what I share with him is that the reason that we're to love God more than we love our own flesh and blood, the reason we're to devote ourselves to God more than we do to our own flesh and blood, is because a proper relationship with Jesus Christ will cause an individual to love and to care for those that they love and care for in this life to the highest degree. In other words, we love best, we love those in our lives best when we have a deep rooted love for Christ, because he in fact teaches us how to love and what love is in its truest sense. Aside from a relationship with him, we cannot love those within our family and our friends to the degree that we should. And so that was just one thought. And yet, in another instance concerning this idea of family being most important, in Matthew chapter 8, Jesus is approached by two men, is what it records here. Matthew 8, Jesus is approached by two men, and the first is a scribe, and the scribe approaches him, and he vows to follow Jesus. And Jesus responds to the scribe, and he says, "The foxes have holes." You're probably familiar with the scripture. He says, "The foxes have holes, the birds have nests, but the Son of Man doesn't have anywhere to lay his head." And the second man approaches him, and he vows to follow Jesus under one condition. And the condition was this. He said, "Let me go and bury my father first, and then I'll come and follow you." And Jesus' response to this man was, "Let the dead bury their dead, but you come and follow me." And now, In the first instance, and we'll get to the second, in the first instance, we see that the scribe vowed to follow Jesus, but Jesus picked up on something about this scribe and he addressed it. Jesus said, essentially, I don't have the luxuries of life. I don't even have the basic necessities of life that you may require in your own life. I don't have a place to lay my head. I don't have a home. In fact, I'm moving from house to house, from village to village. I don't have a home, a sure place to lay my head. And I believe Jesus said this because he wanted to put the scribe on notice that if you're going to follow me, I want you to understand what that means. It's not going to be a cakewalk. It's not going to be something that's comfortable. In fact, I'm often uncomfortable physically. However, Jesus was content to be uncomfortable physically, even though he didn't have those necessities. He was content with doing the will of God. And this is what he was putting the scribe on notice of. Are you going to be content when you don't have anywhere to lay your head? Are you going to be content when your stomach is growling and you're wanting something to eat? Are you still going to do the will of God? He was putting the scribe on notice. You're going to follow me. I want to kind of give you a glimpse into what that's going to look like. And I believe the scribe probably just walked away, not willing to endure such a lifestyle. But the second man is what I want to focus on. This man said that he was going to follow Jesus, but under one condition. He had to go and bury his father. And Jesus's response is really something. And I think in our minds, we can read that and we can think, man, Jesus was being insensitive, or Jesus was being totally unreasonable to tell this man that he couldn't go and bury his father. Well, number one, Jesus didn't say he couldn't go and bury his father. What Jesus was saying is, if you're going to follow me, you're going to have to put the will of God as paramount above all other causes. The cause of Christ, my cause, is going to be the number one cause in your mind as my disciple. This is what he required in the early disciples that he had called. The Bible talks about how they forsook all, they left all, and they followed him. This was the requirement, and this is the requirement. And so what he was telling this man is that you're unfit to follow me if you have a mind to go and tend to lesser matters other than the cause of my kingdom. And so if we're going to follow Jesus, if we're going to be disciples of Christ and true Christians, his will is going to have to be paramount. And that means that our love is going to have to be rooted in him, and our affections are going to have to be cast upon him and upon him alone. And our family cannot trump that. Our relationships, marital relationships, our relationships to our children cannot trump our relationship to Christ. Christ must be first and foremost. This is the message that Jesus has taught. This is what his apostles taught. And this is what the Lord demands. He's always demanded it, even in the old covenant. The first commandment is that we're to love the Lord our God with all of our hearts, minds, souls, and strength. Everything that we have is to be devoted unto God. And in doing so, we are made fit, and we're better able to service those around us, to love those around us when our love is cast upon him. And so I just wanted to share that with you today. Hopefully this video wasn't too long. I want to try to keep these videos of this type pretty short. But let that be an encouragement to you. Remember that family is not the utmost important. Our relationship to God is of the utmost importance. And so focus on Christ today. Focus on his will. And in doing so, you'll find that you're better able to love those around you. All right, I'll see y'all next time at Beyond These Walls.